Hey, Chilly Willy, it's time for Collection Connection, the very last Thursday Collection Connection, which I'll touch on again in just a moment. This past Monday, over on the Plastic Soundwave Cult channel, as always, my brother Plastic Eric showed a record from his collection. In this case, it was Stash, the 1999 stoner sludge metal album from Bongzilla. Eric felt I probably wouldn't be a big fan of this one, but was he right? Well, yeah, he was right. Nonetheless, I'll talk a little bit about it before connecting it to a seemingly unrelated album from my own collection that secretly shares something in common with it. Today, that'll mean staying in the 90s, but crossing the Atlantic to go back to Sweden, a country that's been featured in several recent episodes, for the sugary sweet pop of the Cardigans with their album Life. The challenge for you is to glean that little nugget of common ground that they share from the information given over the course of the video, and then to put that guess in the comments along with any conversation you want to have about the bands or the albums featured, and the first correct answer will receive a shout out in my brother's next video. Now, before we reveal the connection between the prior pair of albums, let's talk real quick about a program note, and that is that we are moving to Tuesdays. From here on out, we will do one episode a week, alternating back and forth between Eric over on the Plastic Soundwave Cult and me here on my channel. And so every Tuesday, we will do a collection connection. And so set your watches for that and get out your methadone, because I will not be doing another one for now another week and a half, because Eric will start off this upcoming Tuesday. So this change is happening right away. I think we knew that we weren't going to set YouTube on fire with our little game. This is something my brother and I decided to do to sort of keep each other on our radars. We have not lived in the same house for 35 years and have lived states and states apart for the most of that, 30 years of that plus. And so we've gone through long stretches where we didn't necessarily communicate all that often, just living our own lives. But this is something that we decided, could keep each other around in our orbits. So I don't want to stop doing it, but I think definitely the effort that goes into putting in one every week has kind of run its course, kind of makes it hard to do other things. So we are going to continue on, but just doing one a week every Tuesday, alternating first him, then me, then him, then me, back and forth. So that'll give you more time to go over the videos and make a guess, and that'll give us more time to do other things. Even within the video, I'll be explaining the complicated history of the Cardigans album a little bit later, and I wanted to do kind of an animation to go with that. I even tried to give it a go yesterday, but it's a little too complex for my current skill set. So I figured, no, I'm not going to be able to turn this around in time. So that would be the kind of thing, I would have more time to figure out how to do something like that. Make a better looking video, a little more fun for me, learn some new skills, and so on and so forth. So as to that connection, the albums were Paul Kelly and the Messengers, Under the Sun, and the Bongzilla album, Stash. And the connection is that both albums contain a song called Under the Sun, the title track from the Paul Kelly album, and a Black Sabbath cover from the Bongzilla album. So that was the connection. Nobody guessed it. We get the point. We're going to spend that on anything we want. And with that, let's get on with the episode. Alrighty, so Stash from Bongzilla. Heavy doom sludge metal group. Very focused on their weed consumption, with song titles that talk about, Fourth Amendment, and just the name of the album, Stash, the album cover art. They're very weed focused. I'm not somebody who consumes any kind of drugs, including marijuana. Not putting a judgment on anybody. I know it's legal most places now, so no judgment. It's just not something that I do. I feel like I have an addictive enough personality that if it was something that I liked, it would be something that I would become addicted to pretty quickly, and I don't want to do that. I already have a cigarette problem that I'm trying to get rid of. So, all that aside, uh, topically, but it's not like you even got the sense of it topically because it was very much that sort of scream singing, and weirdly, it felt, I don't know if it was the speakers I was listening to it on, but it felt down in the mix. So the guitars and stuff, the music didn't bother me. It's not necessarily my thing, but bands that I listen to can go into that sort of, heavy sound at times, and that doesn't bother me. It's really kind of the scream singing that just kind of turns me off. And so I can't tell what he's saying half the time anyway. So he could be singing about weed or yellow submarines or, his grandma's brownie recipe. I wouldn't know. But that said, I thought it was interesting. It was one of those albums that came out, in the dead age of vinyl. So came out in 1999 and only really ever had a CD release initially. And it hasn't been until 2015 was its first pressing on vinyl. It has since been repressed a couple of times, I think in 2019 and 2021. So I thought that was interesting, at least according to Discogs. And maybe even the 2021 one was actually a cassette, like the first time it's on cassette. The only thing that's listed for the year that it initially came out, 1999, is a CD release. One here and one in Japan on Discogs. So I always find that an interesting phenomenon to kind of follow the trail of the formats as they go through. Some people continued to press on vinyl, even in the when it was felt like a dead format. But a lot of labels, smaller labels, couldn't necessarily afford that luxury, so they just put things out on CD. This was one of those titles. I didn't even get around to listen. There's the companion album that is something about altitudes, methods of attaining extreme altitudes or something like that. I didn't even get to that. But that doesn't leave me with a whole lot to say about the album. Not my thing. Eric was right. It didn't strike me as awful. And, if that is your thing, you're welcome to it. And more power to you. I'm certainly not calling it bad music. It just was not music that was made for me, and that's fine. So, with that, I guess let's move on to the connection, which is from 1995, Life, from the Cardigans. Now, a lot like the Yazoo album from last week that I talked about, where I still have my original release because Situation didn't end up being on the compilation of all their music, supposedly, that I subsequently bought. I have 2 copies of Life, the original Minty Fresh American release, and a Japanese issue, both on CD, neither of which are the lineups for the original album. As it was released in Sweden, Life was their debut album through most of the world, but in Sweden and in Japan, their debut album was called Emmerdale. And in that way, like Stray Cats and the Beatles famously, when they put out their second album, Life, that seemed to gather some momentum, the US label said, hey, we want to put out some Cardigans, but they cherry-picked some songs from Emmerdale and Frankenstein them onto Life, changing the order considerably and dropping some of the tracks so that Life, as it was released in the US, is a hybrid version of Emmerdale, and Life as released originally in Sweden. Now, that US version contains 2 songs, Our Space and Over the Water, that are not then on this one, that are Emmerdale tracks, but also contains the song Happy Meal, which was recorded again with new lyrics for their next album, First Band on the Moon. Maybe it was a B-side somewhere. I meant to look that up before I started. But it is not on Emmerdale. And so the US release of Life is a 14-track album that was in Sweden released as an 11-track album, but more than 3 songs from Emmerdale. I think there's 5 songs there is, from that first album, Emmerdale, there's Rise and Shine, Our Space, Celia Inside, Over the Water, Sick and Tired, and Sabbath Bloody Sabbath. Yeah. So 6 tracks from that. And then on this, so 6 tracks from Emmerdale, which means they dropped some of the songs. But strangely, what this Japanese version does of the album, ta-da, is makes it a 16-track album that takes the original Swedish release of Life, restores that track order, so that brings some songs that were dropped from here that were originally released on the Swedish version of Life, which is Pike Bubbles and Sunday Circus Song. I believe those 2 only. Again, if I had the time to do this whole animation thing, this just broke my brain trying to work all this out in a cohesive manner. It was just, I don't know, too complicated. So I have in its entirety the Swedish version, and then it adds 5 tracks on top of the 11 from the original Swedish version of Life that are the tracks that it cherry-picked from Emmerdale, sort of. And apparently this is tracks from the European release of Life. So maybe they had even a different set of songs from the US version. But this includes a song called After All, which was on Emmerdale but is not on the US version. And neither one of these contains all the songs that are on the other. And then later in like 1999, so their Emmerdale came out in Sweden, I believe in 1994. Life came out in 1995 in Sweden. And the US version was released in 1996. Now in 1999, after the success of Love Fool, their big hit in the US from their album First Band on the Moon, they went back and put together a release of Emmerdale that included the tracks that they had kicked off of Life as bonus tracks, as extra tracks on their release of Emmerdale. And so there are some tracks that are on each of these albums. The US version, this Japanese version, the Swedish versions are 2 distinct albums, completely different tracks. I think there's 12 on Emmerdale, 11 on Life, and those get mixed and matched throughout all these other editions throughout the world. And it really broke my head trying to think about it. And it maddens me that that kind of thing goes on, because now I have 7 of those 12 tracks from Emmerdale between these 2 releases, which makes it feel like, do I really want to go back and buy a version of Emmerdale that is also, that's going to fill in those last 5 tracks, but also be an additional copy of all the songs that showed up on here. It's crazy. So, God, I spent an assload of time talking about that, and just think how quickly I could have done that with a nice little animation with showing the songs moving from album to album and the different releases. I really wanted to do that, but there just wasn't the time for it. So what about the music itself? As I mentioned, Love Fool, you probably know Love Fool, the song. That was their one big hit, and it is in some ways emblematic of their sound. Their singer, Nina Persson, has a very kind of breathy, almost Cupid doll kind of voice. Her singing is very breathy and lush and dreamy, and I like it. On the album Life, even as a evolution from Emmerdale, has its own kind of unique sound, and they utilize a lot of vintage and toy instruments for the sound, so it's even more cute and sugary. You know, it is bubblegum in extremis. You know, it is maybe too cute for some, even though the lyrics, as a lot of this music can be rather dark at times. It's delivered in such a fun, happy way. You could see why they released them in Japan. They seem to love that this Life this album, Life, especially seems like something that a Japanese audience would have gone for, because it is very cutesy in sound. And you see there's Nina on the album cover, kind of in ice skates and kind of a classic, almost like a trading card kind of pose. I first heard the song Rise and Shine along with Blur's Country House when I was working in a California pizza kitchen in Alexandria, Virginia, in Old Town Alexandria. And the music would be piped in, and on the regular, on whatever channel loop thing that we had going for a while, were Rise and Shine and Country House by Blur. But this was back in the mid-90s, and so there was no Shazam, there was no... It's like you either knew who the song was by or you didn't, and it took another couple of years to uncover by chance. And I think I heard maybe even a different song by the Cardigans, and it may have been Love Fool. Honestly, it may have been Love Fool, but I don't remember for sure. That's like, I know those vocals, and it finally gave me something to look up, and I was able to work out who the album was. Certainly with Country House, I never would have guessed that that was the name of the song, because they say the words but not in that order. Lives in a house, a very big house in the country. That one took, hearing it, I think that took another 4 or 5 years. So it's possible I may have guessed that the one song was called Rise and Shine and just kind of looked it up and saw what came up. But it's not like you had a ton of streaming media or anything like that on the internet in those days. So it took a while to figure out who it was, but that's where I first heard each of these bands, was just on the overhead music at this California pizza kitchen I was waiting tables for in the mid-90s. I played the bejesus out of this album when I got it, and so I'm kind of used to the US version and the track listing on the US version, which integrates those Emmerdale songs, which are some great songs. I could see why they cherry-picked those ones out, Rise and Shine being one of them. But they're kind of sprinkled throughout the track listing, and that was the track listing I got used to. And then when I bought this Japanese version, the fact that they put all those songs at the end that I really like, I kind of miss it while I'm listening to the album. So I'm not even sure what I would recommend to buy. Like, look for the original Swedish version, look for the original US version, look for this expanded. I don't know. It's really tough to recommend a particular edition. I kind of wish I could go back in time and just get the Swedish version of Emmerdale and the Swedish version of Life. But even then, I wouldn't have the track Happy Meal, which was on the US version initially. So it's nutty. It's really tough to wrap my mind around all this stuff, and it drives me crazy as a collector of songs. I want all the songs, but lots of toy xylophones, kind of squonkily played brass and stuff like that. That's not like real smooth brass arrangements, but kind of honk, 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 kind of brass arrangements. It's very cute. It's like Belle and Sebastian, who are very sort of fey and art school themselves, cranked up, to 11. And just the songs that I love, like Carnival, which is a great one that starts it off and is one that is exclusive to the Life album. Pike Bubbles, I'm glad that I got that eventually, but it is very cutesy and has, like clarinets and oboes and shit doing kind of squonky. Fine is one that I love. Sick and Tired, Rise and Shine, Celia Inside. These are all Emmerdale tracks that were on here that I really like. And their cover of Sabbath Bloody Sabbath. Yeah, I really don't want to make another 35-minute video that I have to struggle to cut down to 25 minutes like I did last week, so maybe that's enough. I recommend it. It was one of my favorite albums of the 90s, although it's not something that I've gone back to too much. And what felt like the overexposure of Love Fool, which I like as a song, I still like as a song. And I do have that next album, First Band on the Moon, which incidentally, I could have used that one also for the connection, but I think just those two albums from the Cardigans catalog could connect to the Bongzilla album. This is one, I don't know how Eric's going to feel about it, but like I said, one of my favorites. Really went against type. This is, 1995, 96. So deep in the grunge era and really against type, for any sort of musical movement going on in America in the 1990s. So it kind of stuck out like a sore thumb, but I loved it. It was one of the rare albums that I clung on to from the mid 90s when I was really kind of out of touch with what was going on with music, because everything that I heard around me wasn't something that resonated with me. So it's an album that means a lot to me, even though I haven't gone back to it a whole ton in recent years. It was great to finally sort out in my iTunes these two different albums, which I just had kind of down as like 19 tracks. And I finally worked out the order that they should be in, kind of just in a mixed mess between the two albums. But I worked all that out, tried to do my animation, didn't have time. Hopefully I will have time to do that kind of thing in the future. Would be fun for me. And to that end, you can look on Tuesday now for Eric's response. He will find something in his music collection to connect to Life from the Cardigans. So that will start the new era where we're going one episode a week. Eric 1 week, me the next week, always on Tuesday. Eric may have some videos to fill in the meantime, and maybe I will too eventually. This will allow a little time in our schedules to do that. If you have a guess as to the connection between the Bongzilla album and Life, then put that down in the comments. If you just want to talk about the Cardigans or sway me on Bongzilla, what I should be listening for, that's up to you. And if you have something that you're like, ooh, I know what I would connect one of these albums to from my collection, you can tell us about that too. It's all good, but in the meantime, that's all I have. So I thank you for watching. Bye-bye.